Hello everyone, welcome to Digital Fridays. Online teaching and collaborative reading by Christina Katopodis will be the 14th of a series of HASTAC webinars that started in 2019. Christina Katopodis is a PhD candidate in English and a Futures Initiative Fellow at the Graduate Center in the City University of New York, and also an adjunct instructor at Hunter College. She is currently co-authoring a book with Cathy Davidson, Transforming Every Classroom, a Practical Guide, that is under contract to Harvard University Press and will be published in 2022.
This is Online Teaching and Collaborative Reading. I'm Christina Katopodis. You can find me on Twitter or virtually on the internet, since I will not be at the Graduate Center or Hunter College campuses anytime soon. I hope everyone is doing all right. Take a deep breath. We're all trying to scramble to go online and get our students there, and this is an extraordinary time. So it's amazing that you were able to carve out any time to be here, and I hope that this will be helpful for everyone. And just so you know, there'll be a couple moments where I'm going to open it up to discussion. And most of you have come in on mute. So if you do want to participate verbally, you'll need to unmute yourself first. You can also write in the chat box. So I'm going to talk a little bit about Twitter first, and then I'll talk about Manifold. So here we are. So Twitter. The great thing about teaching with Twitter that I find is it gives me an opportunity to talk to students about their security online, about best practices for coming up with a good username, nothing silly like Fuzzy Kitten 1417, which is I think my first AIM username that I started with when I was 14 years old. So, coming up with a professional Twitter handle, coming up with a good password, a good profile picture, and making sure that their accounts are secure and their identities online are secure. So I'm not going to get too much into that. I'm happy to talk about that in Q&A. But what I like about teaching with Twitter, and I've done this a few times where my students live tweeted our classes or also used our class hashtag to tweet in between classes. And I've done a few different kinds of assignments to kind of build a community with Twitter online, and also introduce my students to academic Twitter, where they can meet other scholars who are interested in the same things they are by using certain hashtags that those scholars are using. So just a few bullet points. Teaching with Twitter is great for asynchronous reading with a potentially global community. So my students would do things like post photos of them with their books open, with their cats sprawled out on their books, just like we on academic Twitter frequently do. They share comments about the readings, photos again, and also some solidarity in reading difficult texts, for example, struggling with certain concepts or ideas. I teach early American literature, so sharing frustrations about sexism and racism and xenophobia, and also sharing funny memes to make the reading experience fun and delightful, even if it is a bit of a slog when we're reading really difficult texts. Another nice thing about using a class hashtag that's unique to the class is that you can then search for that hashtag and kind of collect these cumulative community notes for your class. And I really like that about it. And you can do that using multiple different apps or just searching for that hashtag on Twitter. So it can be as involved or not as you like. One thing that I do in teaching is I assign students a certain number of tweets and comments on their peers' tweets that are required in a given day, or let's say a week-long period of reading. So, one assignment that I've used is, this is a way that I use to take attendance. In the first 5 minutes, you tweet a question about the reading or a question about the assignment for the day, whatever that might be. And then I would assign, not only tweeting out your own question, but you're also required to respond to a peer's tweet. and answer their question or ask a follow-up question. And so it kind of spurs them in the direction of having more of a conversation online. And that's something that I think in this unique and extraordinary time could be really useful. And the nice thing about this is, again, that you're potentially engaging a global community. It's not just you and your 14 or maybe 200 students. It's you and this global community of readers. So just moving to the next slide here, this is the unique hashtag that I used in 2016, hashtag AmLitENV. It was an American literature survey course with a focus on environment. And you can see at the top that if you just search for that hashtag in the search bar on Twitter, that you can find all of the top tweets. And now these aren't like super popular, hundreds and thousands of followers. You can really see that there's maybe one retweet, maybe 2, 3, 4, 5 likes. So you really are, with a unique hashtag, targeting a very narrow audience, unless you decide to also include maybe a broader hashtag, like hashtag PhD chat is one that I use frequently for teaching and life as a grad student. My students also invented their own hashtag. As you can see, they used AmLitENV, and they also used DAM395. The course number was 395. So they invented that, and they clearly ran away with it and had some fun. Moving to the next slide, here are some examples of things that you could do. Hi Danielle ended up posting her blog posts for the class to share them online. Students also used these tweets as opportunities to take notes in class, to take notes while reading, to note important quotations that they wanted to remember, because again, everyone can go back on Twitter and search for these. I mean, I found these yesterday as I was preparing my slides, and so there's this record online of the discussions that we were having. There are also some funny moments. Gurjeet tweeted, in contemporary literature, why does every powerful female figure have to get married? Hashtag AmLitENV, hashtag 4HS, which was the unique hashtag for that particular day in class. And then hashtag so annoying, and a funny meme. One reason why I use a particular hashtag for that day in class was when we were meeting in person. I wouldn't give students the unique hashtag for that day until the beginning of class, and that's how I would know they only have 5 minutes to sign on Twitter, and I would know that they need this unique hashtag. They need to be in person to get it. So they need to be tuned in. So that's one way to do something synchronously, but I feel like in these extraordinary circumstances that we're in, you might not use a unique hashtag for the day, but maybe a unique hashtag for the week. And then you yourself could go back, search for your class hashtag plus this unique hashtag for the week, and take attendance basically, or take stock of what your students have done. And that's kind of how I filled in my grade book with a certain number of tweets per person and the like. So that's kind of how I kept track of what they were doing, whether they completed the assignment or did not complete the assignment. So these weren't really so much graded as they were quantitative ways that I could measure how much they were engaging with each other online. And so it was more of a complete or incomplete, or like, did you go above and beyond and get really excited about this text and tweet a whole bunch of stuff about it. So again, you can share blog posts, you can share class notes, reading notes, thoughts while reading. And then one really cool thing that I love about this is a student of mine wrote a response to one of these scholars that I follow online. She read a chapter from this scholar's book and wrote about it in her blog post for my class. And I follow Laura Milke on Twitter, and I said, hey, Laura, check this out. My student read part of your book and wrote about it in this blog post. And Laura responded, and the student saw like, oh my gosh, here's this scholar that I've been engaging with, whose work I really enjoy. I can't believe I'm meeting her virtually. So I think that there are some really beautiful moments that this extraordinary time could open up for us. So again, just to kind of recap, Twitter is great for asynchronous reading with a potentially global community, for sharing things, and also sharing in solidarity in this very difficult time. It's a way to kind of accrue class community notes with a unique hashtag, and you can assign a certain number of tweets and comments if you want to engage with this in your teaching. So I'm going to open it up for discussion and ask, how have you used Twitter in your classroom, and what are some other Twitter-like tools you use now, or maybe similar tools you're interested in trying in the future? And just to remind you, as you think about responses, to unmute yourself if you're going to speak. So how are people using Twitter in their virtual classrooms or other Twitter-like tools? Question here from Melissa. Do you review the tweets at the beginning of class? So that's a great question. One thing this actually opens up a fond memory. I found that when my students started live tweeting our discussions, that they often ended up tweeting my really random and funny personal anecdotes more than they sometimes more than they tweeted what we were actually reading and talking about, because they found them really hilarious. So I became a lot more careful about what tangents I went on, and what I said, because it could end up online. So that was an interesting way of holding me publicly accountable. But one thing that I do is I would project them. So again, this is in a physical classroom. I would project our tweets up on the whiteboard, or on the projector. So I would go on Twitter on a computer in the classroom, search for our unique hashtag and our class hashtag of the day, and then we could actually see the tweets as they popped up and address them. And so that was one way in which I engaged the tweets in the classroom. Let's see. Have not used Twitter yet. I'm afraid of students wasting time going off tangents, checking other tweets, or the discussions going haywire. So I definitely understand this concern, and students had pretty great reviews. So one thing I did was I had a check-in with them on a Google form. I surveyed my students to ask them mid-semester, how is this going? Do you like this? Do you hate it? Why? Like, do you find it distracting? Do you find it helpful? I also asked them this at the very end of the semester. Most of my students reported an initial discomfort with using Twitter. Some really were not familiar with the platform, and so there was a bit of a learning curve in the beginning. Other students had already had their own handles on Twitter. And in general, I found that as long as we were doing this like devoted time, like the first 5 minutes of class just devoted to tweeting. I've also done this with flashcards and not with Twitter. Physical flashcards, we do think, pair, shares in the beginning, and that's how I take attendance. That's a very common method, as you know, that I advocate for, that most of the Futures Initiative and HASTAC also advocate for, those kind of inventory methods. So as long as you're devoting a significant amount of time for it, and then there's a time where I say, okay, now put your phones away and let's focus on being present with each other right now. Some students found Twitter a little bit distracting, and some students really loved it. And what I like about these methods is that it gives particularly introverted students a chance to really engage online. And so they might not necessarily feel comfortable speaking in front of their peers in a classroom where physically everyone is looking at you. That's incredibly intimidating, not just in a classroom of, say, 15 to 30 students, but if you're in a large lecture hall, 200 people are looking at you. And that's very intimidating. And so what I like about this kind of inventory method is it gives the introverted students a little bit of slack. It gives them a little bit of space and room to share with their peers and not feel like the whole room is staring at them. I haven't used Twitter in class, but I use Microsoft Teams and have channels dedicated to certain topics where students respond to questions, post images, etc. That sounds awesome. Curious about FARPA concerns with having a whole class in a public space. That's a great question. And so one of the things that I think we are all probably thinking about right now, and honestly, I don't know if everyone right now has time given the COVID crisis. I don't know if everyone has time to really go into depth about this, but I think this is really, really important that when you go online with your students, you need to talk to them about their security and their safety online, and only presenting their digital persona. And I make it very clear, and I put it in scare quotes, the you that you are online is public. And so you only share what you feel comfortable with online as the you that you present yourself as online. That is not the whole you, that's not the real you, that's the digital public you. And so if I were to have a conversation about going online, let's say on Twitter with my students right now, I would be talking to them about capitalist surveillance. I'd be talking to them about hackers and bots. I'd be talking to them about, you know, what if an employer Googles you 10 years from now? What are they going to see? And are you okay with that being out there? And so as really the globe goes online, we need to talk to our students about safety and security. And I think that's really important. And I know many of us are scrambling right now and we might not necessarily have time, but I think that's a really important step. So in terms of FARPA concerns, like before any of my students go on Twitter, I have a day really, depending on if it's a 45-minute class, then that whole class. If it's an hour and 15 minutes, then maybe half of the class is spent on just talking about what it means to go public. And one of the beauties of going public is when you're writing for a public audience, it really raises the bar. So you really need to think about who you're writing for, who your audience is, and how you're presenting this information to the audience that you're targeting. And I think it really makes students feel like their work has a life beyond this class. And I think it helps students feel like they're having more of an impact. They're doing something, engaging, again, a potentially global public. And I think it also gives students some advice, guidance, and mentorship along the way. When all of us are going online, what better time than with your professor to have advice and mentorship as things arise and come up, that this is a great way to introduce them to going online and thinking about their digital persona. What about students who don't have or don't want to use their personal Twitter for school? How do we handle those students or keep them engaged with those who are on Twitter? So I always offer students to make a dummy account for our class, and many of my students do. They make an account that's specifically for that class. They use it for nothing else. They will sometimes use a handle related to the class content, making a funny pun on something. And so I never require that they use their personal accounts or share any personal information online. And I really encourage them not to use their names and never to share where they're tweeting from or anything specific about themselves. Let's see, how long are your class sessions and how many students are enrolled in your sections where you use Twitter? So I've used Twitter with about 15 students, and I've used Twitter with 35 students. I have not done this with 200 students. I think that data would be a lot to manage all at once. And so I've not used it with an enormous lecture of hundreds of students. Let's see. Would Slack be a more private but less publicly engaged way to talk online for the students? Absolutely. I think Slack is a great tool. Speaking of that question of what are some other Twitter-like tools you use now or similar tools you're interested in trying, Slack is a great platform. Highly recommend. All right. Anyone else? I'll move forward and we can always circle back to this later. Okay. CUNY Manifold. I love Manifold. I hope that you had some time to explore Manifold before this. If you haven't and you want to pull it up on your computer in the background, go to cuny.manifoldapp.org. So very briefly, some bullet points. Again, this is great for asynchronous reading, but more specifically with an academic community. And it might not necessarily be an academic community. I've shared, let's say, Margaret Fuller's The Great Lawsuit with laypersons who love Margaret Fuller and love her work. So it's not necessarily just an academic community, but I think that most of the people who are using Manifold right now, like at CUNY or at other campuses, are somehow related to an academic community. One nice thing about using this platform to read digital editions of text is that you can make your highlights of the text and your annotations public. So what you put there publicly, people will be able to see, and it kind of just gathers. Again, these are cumulative public notes, and I'll show you what I mean in just a minute. Very quickly, one way that I've used Manifold or like as an assignment in teaching is to assign a certain number of annotations that students must make within a particular week. So if we're reading Hope Leslie, I'll ask my students like make, at least 4 annotations between now and, next Monday, for example. So if you're in the Manifold app right now, you can, it's again, cuny.manifoldapp.org. Definitely click on projects and explore the many texts and projects that are available there. And then I'm going to just show you what this looks like when you click on a project. I am signed in. You can see my little icon in the upper right hand corner, so that shows that I'm signed in. And it's important to be signed in to make your annotations and highlights and use the full spectrum of what Manifold can do. And I'm going to just briefly show you one edition. This is part of the CUNY Student Editions project run by Paul Hebert. I edited this edition, so I'm familiar with it, which is why I'm showing it. And let's see, you can learn more about CUNY Student Editions if you click through, and you can click to start reading. So if you click to start reading a text, you're going to see something like this. So right now in the top left, I've highlighted that we're in the introduction. And I've put arrows onto a couple key things. So the word essentialism has an underline under it. Their understanding of the concept of woman's sphere as a cultural construction is highlighted, and then down toward the bottom right, ravishing harmony of the spheres has a couple annotations. That's what the underlining is for. The underlining is for annotations. So how do I annotate? So if I'm logged in, I might highlight, scroll over a particular text, highlight it, and then this pop-up shows up and it says share, annotate, highlight, and what current group am I doing this in? So you can actually group these if you want to. And I'm going to turn it over to Jojo Carlin in a minute, and she could maybe talk a little bit more about Manifold and all of its amazing capabilities. So if I click to annotate, then the annotation, once I publish it, is going to look something like this. So Pell Mell about 1 month ago said, investigate the separate spheres of men and women, or public and domestic spheres. And there's a nice little link there. So what was annotated? It was the word spheres. And then you can close out of that and go back to the text. So if you look at the bottom right, she had clicked on spheres and decided to annotate that. And this was her annotation. And so that lives there now. And we can accumulate over time all of these annotations. That's one of the beautiful things about using Manifold, is you're engaging with an academic community asynchronously, potentially over years, the life of this edition. So just a quick recap, CUNY Manifold is great for asynchronous reading with an academic community. Your highlights and annotations can be posted publicly. You can also keep them private for just yourself. These accumulate over time. So, it's a great project to have students as a class annotate this text. And, you can assign a certain number of annotations per week per student. And you can also make that more specific. Like, what specifically do you want them to annotate? Do you want them to share links to further reading or resources that they found? Like, how do you want them to annotate and engage with the text? So another thing Manifold opens up is a conversation about how we annotate texts and how we read closely. And I find it's often useful to just, again, if I'm in a physical classroom, I open up my book and I show my students, here are my highlights, here are my stars in the margins, my circles around these words, my dog-eared pages, my flags and tabs. Like, this is how much I engage with the text when I read. And I think that, it depends on the student, but not everyone can afford to buy a really expensive textbook, highlight it, and write in it. Oftentimes students are selling back their books, but all of these online are free. And so I think that these are great, easy to read, like a little bit easier to read than going on to Gutenberg, although I love Gutenberg as a resource. Yeah, I love teaching with Manifold, and I'm excited to talk more about it. So that's me, and I'd love to open it up to discussion. First, handing it over to Jojo, if you're able to talk for a few minutes about Manifold, that would be great, how you've used it in your classroom, also just about the platform itself.
Hi.
And then we'll open it up to more questions.
Yeah, can everybody hear me? I think
I can hear you.
Okay, as long as you can hear me, I'm going to guess that others can. So just a little introduction. I am the Graduate Center Manifold, I guess I'm the Manifold Graduate Fellow. So I've been working on Manifold for a bunch of years, and it is based at the Graduate Center at CUNY in collaboration with the University of Minnesota Press and Cast Iron Coding, which is a development firm in Portland, Oregon, started by a CUNY English Miltonist. He graduated a while back and he went off to become a computer programmer, like you do with an English degree. And so the platform is very much based in ideas around what is useful for academic publishing. It was originally built to be for scholarly monographs. So the sort of impetus behind the annotations was from the perspective of contemporary academics working together through open access texts. And the University of Minnesota Press uses it for their entire open access library. And as we've sort of built out the platform, we discovered that, wait, we really want to continue to use this not just for the sort of highest level of academic scholarship, but to really think about it for classroom use and in terms of open educational resources. So the development has been moving in that direction as well. And the introduction of reading groups, which are relatively new, is a large part of that and will continue to be a part of the development as we sort of figure out what the best ways are for students to engage in this space. The other two things I want to say before I so I can let other people ask questions. This is 100% grant funded. So currently we're entering our third cycle with the Mellon Foundation, and it is free for use. Anybody at CUNY can get an account to create their own books. It's just a simple little form that you fill out to say, this is the project I'm doing. And especially as things are sort of hectically going online right now, I am here to help people get books up, because it's not the most difficult to publish things, but it does require a little bit of just like, it just takes time to approach any new software. And so I am here to help if people want to put their books online on the CUNY platform. So
Thank you so much, Jojo.
yeah.
Jojo has helped me a lot with this platform, getting some text online as I was going with my classes. So we have a question about the annotations. Are you concerned that this introduces material that is non-scholarly and potentially wrong, too simplified, etc.? So this is a great question, and this actually came up in MLA 2 years ago, I think. I think that for me, that's not a concern. So I should just say that up front. For me, you know, I've looked back at books, that I kept at my mom's house that I read when I was an undergrad. And I actually looked at my marginalia and was, equal parts like shocked, humored, and like totally ashamed at like some of the things that I wrote in the margins, like super embarrassing. But also like my affective engagement with the text, like, I wrote a lot of OMGs in the margins of my copy of Othello in undergrad. So that, that introduction to that text in that moment for me was really pivotal. And so to me, this is really about building community online. And one of the amazing opportunities in seeing what your students annotate is that isn't just something that they sit with alone without any feedback, without any engagement from a professor or another peer. Those are just like, private annotations. And I think that there's room for, our private feelings and our private engagements with text. Reading is a very personal activity. It's also a very embodied and emotional activity, I think. And so one of the beauties of building this community is that if someone, like, let's say, posts misinformation, this is a huge concern right now. You have a community that is going to respond to you, that can give you feedback and be like, hey, did you check your source? Is that the most reliable source of information? How about we talk about, or how about we spend at least a whole day talking about what makes a source reliable, how we fact check, how we interpret what a scholarly source is, and go through all of the places where, through our libraries, many of which are also posting a lot more for free online and engaging virtually to meet the needs of students right now. So it's not so much a concern for me because that was someone's legitimate response to reading, and how beautiful that we can share and talk about that and make it a teachable moment. And so, yeah, that's just not, it's more, for me, I see it more as an opportunity. So I'm curious if anyone else on here has used Manifold in their classroom, or if you're going through the many projects available, what project should be on Manifold that isn't yet? Like, what would you love to see up on Manifold?
As people are sort of thinking about that, just to sort of piggyback on what Christina was saying about annotations and sort of the conversation about misinformation. The other thing that sorry, I'm like looking at the questions. The other thing about working within the annotations is that you have different settings for your reading groups, so that you can have a reading group that's just within your class, and then you can have the conversation about which annotations become public for the sort of like general record. And so there's that opportunity to share just within the class, where you can have a little bit more ability to edit, like to talk to people, because the annotations belong to the person writing them. No one removes these. This is all the student's property. So everything they write is their own, and no one is getting rid of that. You can flag comments, but as the instructor, you cannot delete your students' comments. That is outside of the ethos of the platform, which is really about like students owning their own work. So you can flag things if it seems like it's dangerous content, or, you know, offensive or defamatory or whatever. But there is not you are not the owner of that content. So I just wanted to sort of put that out there, that the annotation groups are a way to sort of contain the work that your students are doing and have those sort of teachable moments within a smaller group before maybe they want to go public with whatever comment to say, like, this is an annotation that belongs in the sort of general record. The other thing that I don't think has happened yet, but is a feature that's going to be developed, is that author annotations will appear differently from anyone else's annotations, so that as the author of a text, you'll have the opportunity to put your own annotations in, because people are using Manifold for sort of old public domain texts that you can get, and sort of to put things that are out of print online for your students to be able to work with. But it's also a space for new scholarship that people want to provide openly, and you choose what license you want to put on that. Various of the groups at the Graduate Center are publishing handbooks. The Teaching and Learning Center has published a handbook. Courses like Cathy Davidson's class, which I don't know if it was called Structuring Equality, but that's the name of the text that came out of this seminar. People are editing collections of student blog posts where, you know, you say, would you be interested in contributing to this at the end of the semester, as a way to publicize the work that students are doing and to make them feel like they've created something that belongs within the sort of wider group. So these are all options. Christina's scrolling through some of the different texts that are up there now, and you can see just the sort of range of what's going on. So yeah, annotate films too. The platform I know that allows film annotation in this way, we don't have it yet in Manifold, but Scalar does. If you're working with a lot of films and you have sort of film that you want to put different marks on, if you're doing sort of close readings of images within a series of images in a film, Scalar, the platform out of they're out of USC, is a platform that allows for that. Avoiding echo chambers, and also how do we tame dominant loud voices to enhance plurality of both information, but more importantly, of critical assessment of information. Christina, do you have wise words about avoiding creation of echo chambers?
Yes, hold on, I have to make sure there we go, okay. So yeah, avoiding echo chambers, you know, I think going back to the groups and group annotations, I think here I can quickly show this slide here. Again, at the bottom here, like if I highlight women in the 19th century, I can choose like which group I annotate that in. And so, that can really shrink your chamber, if you will, or my current group setting is my public annotation. So you can expand it widely. And so in general, I think that if you're using one of these platforms, it's less a problem of having an echo chamber in that you're already expanding your audience beyond the doors of your classroom. And, my particular teaching style is to share with students what my biases are so that I'm transparent, fully transparent, rather than pretending to be objective, because none of us is objective. And so I never pretend with my students that I am an objective voice, and I constantly ask them to disagree with me, and I make it a safe space for there to be other viewpoints and other ways of seeing things. So I do the best I can in my physical classroom to not produce an echo chamber. I think the risk is even higher when you do that and you close the door and you have this small group of people that meets physically. I think that there's a lot more accountability online, and that the risk of that is much lower.
There's a question about annotating podcasts. So Manifold has great opportunities for resources. And one of the things that you can do as the creator of a project, so anyone can annotate with words and links over on the side currently, but the person who has created the project can place little anchors to resources and can collect a group of multimedia resources, and it takes like 12 different types of resources. You can pull in lots of different things. Let me see if I don't think I have a screen open. I can try to get one open and show you what I'm talking about. But the podcasts, if you have a podcast that is available on I don't know, SoundCloud or YouTube, you can add that as a resource. Okay, I'm going to share my screen. Let's see. It's not, oh, I'm in the wrong screen. Here we go. Share. It's the right one. I'm going to hope
Yep,
okay.
You're sharing.
Okay, let's make sure I'm in the right one. So if I am in, this is actually a project that was produced. It was a book written by professors at the Graduate Center, or edited by professors at the Graduate Center who were under a contract with the University of West Virginia Press, and they got permission to use this for their peer review. There are more permissions sort of like coming that will allow for more closed peer review. This was a very open peer review. Okay, but if we go to a project, say, let's see, I should probably choose one of my own projects. This is always, these are just, right now, these are teaching texts that you've got. This Gender and Society and Us in the Classroom is a collection of student work that's really quite inspiring to read. So we'll go to the Purloined Letter. Okay. So I put this project up just because I do communications and letters, and I was teaching it in the class to just have my students read together, which was a very interesting experience to have them sit down and have to read online together, because I was working with communication students and their attention for sort of sitting and reading was different from English students, which was exciting for me. But this was a while ago. If I am the owner of this project, which I am, and this was just, I'm pretty sure I used a Google Doc to make this. So it was a very simple, or I found an EPUB online, but I didn't spend much time preparing the text. So there's no table of contents. It's a short piece anyways. So if I were working within a group, I would have all these options. But as a person who created this, I have this opportunity to put resources on. So if I had, say, a podcast, it's just Edgar Allan, I can't spell, podcast. There we go. Creepy tales popular on the web. If I pulled some podcast from the internet, and I don't want to mark it as played. I've never actually used Google Podcasts, so I'm exploring here. Let's visit the website. Basically what I would need is a link to this podcast. So it's an iTunes podcast. And if I find a link for the podcast itself, I need a share link. I'm having troubles with all this stuff on my screen. Always test things before you try to demo in person. It's great. Sure, we can open it. This is gonna get crazy. I'm gonna show you from within Manifold where I'm much more comfortable. So if I am in Manifold, and I'm gonna move this so that I can get out of this screen. Okay, if I am here as a project creator, I have the opportunity to, got to move my screen over. Enter admin mode, and on the Purloined Letter, I can add resources of various types. And once I've added a resource, so in this case, if I'm trying to add a podcast and I went to do it, I could upload the audio file right here. So as you can see, it takes a bunch of different formats. And if I just get that audio file, we're just gonna do it. Okay, if I have that audio file and I pull this, still downloading. Once this is downloaded, I'm sorry, my internet is slow off in my retreat in the woods, but I would be able to upload this audio file here. And to show you what that sort of looks like if you have audio files, if I go to this professor's selections of Petrarch, she wanted to have the selections that she had made available for her students, but also she wanted to add the LibriVox audio recording so that her students could hear the poems in the Italian. And so it allows for you to have this, I'm gonna put that down there. You can have the podcasts available as audio right there. And there is on the resource, if you visit the resource page, there's room for comments, so your students can comment. It's not like immediate annotation in the sense that it's attached to a time unless you write the time, but you can comment collectively about the same resource. And so the resource will be linked within the text, and your students then move out to the resources and can see that. But you also have what's called a sort of resource library. It's the resource collection, so that you can see all of the audio at once in a shared space where all of these exist, so that they can go through and navigate that way as well. So the question I'm just seeing, annotate podcast. So APO Did you see the comment section? Because that would be how you would annotate the podcast, but you would have to put sort of the time markers in the annotation to say, like, at this point, you know, that's where I mean this thing. But you would have a space that's attached to that resource to have that conversation. The next question, can you only upload manifold texts to manifold texts that are open access in the public domain? That is correct. So you are responsible for the copyright of your project. And so you have to treat it as you would any citation, like as you would within your discipline for citation and for appropriate permissions. So you can excerpt things within the context of a chapter if you're writing, if more of it is your writing than the other person's. There are also sort of like your general OER concerns about how do I upload a text that I want to use a portion of it and I want to have however much of my own writing. And so you would have to sort of respect the typical, oh, it's because I'm telling you twice, the typical rules of copyright. But when you have your text, so if you've created a project, and just to sort of give you an idea of how straightforward this is, when you're creating a project, you have my HASTAC project. It's a straightforward little menu, and you can upload a text very quickly. Your project doesn't have to have text. Like if you just wanted to have a bunch of resources that your students are using, you can do that as its own project. But you have within the general, you have your publication date. You set some settings for what you're putting, what the project is. And once the project is saved, you also go and you check your metadata. So you're responsible, the website is not going to check you to make sure that you are being responsible. If you get a cease and desist, you know, that's your sort of your problem. But the space is there for you to follow all the rules. So we hope that people use it responsibly so that we don't have to go around and make sure that people are.
Thank you so much. I'm super excited about knowing about this audio, because now I could just put so much audio into Walden and use my sound recordings, and I'm so excited.
Yeah. And with your Walden, the other thing is if we get you to create your own text with using Markdown, as opposed to using the EPUB that you already have, which is lovely and we love it. But or you can edit the EPUB to embed the audio, so that you can have it inline embedded, and it would show that little player screen right there. So your SoundCloud could show up. So to just show you what that looks like.
The Walden that's up right now is Paul's.
Yeah.
And so we've been talking about doing a different version where I could put in sound.
Great. So what did I call it? Experiments. Someone else is experimenting. Some experiments in form. Okay, so I put together this dummy project just to show some of the things that people can put into these. So this is a story map that is embedded inline so that you can see the history of manifold scholarship. I made this story map using Night Lab story maps, and it's right there within the text. And so you can go through the little descriptions that I made about what the project, where the project started, but it's all inline in the text. I also put it as a resource. So this is the difference between something that is embedded and something that exists as a resource. So this little icon here shows a resource that is anchored in the text versus something that's embedded inline. And this is what podcasts look like when they are embedded inline.
Very cool.
So
thank you. I want to be aware of your time and everyone else's. I'm just give you a big warm thank you for being here, Jojo, and for answering so many questions. I learned more things about Manifold, and I'm super excited to keep using it. Thank you, everyone, for participating, for asking such excellent and intelligent questions. I'm around and happy to answer more, and I know Jojo is too. Goose, is there anything else that, any announcements or anything?
I want to thank you, Christina, and thank you, Jojo, for this wonderful and timely presentation. Also, thank you all for joining us live today, or if you're watching this webinar on YouTube at a later day, the recording will be posted in a few days. And in the meantime, stay tuned for more HASTAC Digital Friday webinars, and be safe.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Christina.
Thank you, Jojo.